Hello, friends, and welcome back to Stories About Entitled People. Let's start our video with a story about a terrible employee who harassed our OP and stole money from the cash register, hoping that he'd get away with it. Well, in the end, he got away, but in a slightly different way. But before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to our channel if you're new here and turn on notifications so you don't miss a new video every single day. Here we go. I know I stole your money. Can I borrow some money? When I was in my early 20s, I got a job at a cell phone store. It was one of those prepaid companies that usually attracts trashier customers or parents buying a first cell phone for their kid. I once got robbed and we had to take down our iPhone display because people kept stealing the real display phones. We were never supposed to have over $300 in the register because of the theft issues in the area, and in our store, we had a safe in the back that we'd put money into. The safe also kept the petty cash, and that's where we put the cell phones at night once we closed. I was the store lead, so I was the full-time person, and a guy around my age worked part-time. He was a D-bag and just all around not a good person. Our store never spent all the petty cash, and this kid eventually got fired for stealing the leftover cash. That wasn't the only money he stole, though. One day, a customer came in and needed to start new service. He was getting a phone for his son, and I worked with him for an hour and a half, picking out the perfect phone and plan and showing him how to use it so he could make sure his son wasn't hiding stuff. At the end of the transaction, he slipped a $20 bill into a vase on the counter and said I deserved it for being so helpful. This was at the end of the day, and I was running late on closing duties, so I rushed around to get everything done. I ended up leaving without grabbing my tip. I realized after I got home, so I texted my coworker and told him to put it in an envelope in the safe for me since he opened the next morning. Of course, he claimed there was no money and he stole it. I told my boss and she checked the cameras and no surprise saw him take it. He claimed there was a miscommunication and he thought it was his. She ended up taking the money out of his check to pay me back because he said he already spent the money. He literally asked me on that payday to give him, not borrow, $30 because he said he had a bill to pay, and I took $20 from his check. I laughed and said no, and he was livid. He told me I owed him, and then he called me a selfish bee. He got fired a week later because my boss found out he was stealing petty cash. I just could not believe he stole my money, then turned around and asked me to give him the money he stole back, plus $10 more. He didn't even ask if he could borrow it and pay me back. He asked me to just give it to him. What a selfish bee for not letting him steal your money. Obviously, you owe him that $20 plus the extra $10 for all the trouble you put him through. And our second story. Aircraft carrier compliance. Back in 1983, I was a 23-year-old Navy nuclear power plant operator. Most of us were early to mid-20s, nice NCOs operating and maintaining Navy nuclear plants. The most highly educated, highly trained bunch of smart butts you'll ever meet. Most of the officers over us were okay, but some made sure that you knew they were the officers in charge of you. One such officer was Larry. This ship had 4 propulsion plants. Each one had 2 reactors, a main engine, all the accessories that go with that, and a control room. It required about 12 operators overseen by a senior NCO in the plant and an officer in the control room. We were coming home to San Francisco Bay after a very successful 9-month deployment. Normal deployments are 6 months, but we did some extra credit work and we're coming home to a hero's welcome. Big to-do. They even flew the cast of the Star Trek movie, the ones from the original TV show, out to ride us in. Big PR campaign, news helicopters, family waiting on the pier. On the main engines, as long as you're going faster than 10 knots, the water will flow through them and keep them cool. If you go slower than 10 knots, you have to start a big pump to flow water to keep them cool. Got to keep them cool or they won't work. We're steaming fast under the Golden Gate Bridge at low tide, coming home. Need to do this at low tide so we'll fit under the Golden Gate and San Francisco Oakland Bay bridges. On number 2 main engine is throttleman, Mark. He actually controls the steam to number 2 main engine. You've seen in the movies where the captain pulls the handles on the engine controls, bells ring, and it goes to all ahead full or whatever? Well, he was on the other end of those, actually opening the steam valves to the main engine to do that. He was a little wise butt, and you wanted to choke him whenever he talked to you. He wasn't a bad guy, he just exuded an aura that made you want to slap him. As we pass under the Golden Gate Bridge, faster than 10 knots, Mark announces, starting the main Cirque water pump. He's early, but he's being cautious. Larry snaps, "I'm the officer. I give the orders. I'll tell you when to start that pump." "Aye, aye, sir." This was heard by the entire watch team in the control room, Mark, assistant throttleman, log recorder, and both reactor panel operators. All junior NCOs, none liking Larry. We start slowing down. We slow down more. We slow down more. Mark announces every speed change, being a proper professional watchstander. At about 7 knots, the main engine high temperature alarm sounds. Mark announces, "Main engine high temperature alarm, shutting the throttles and starting the main Cirque pump," which is the exact right response. This changes number 2 propeller from pushing the ship to being a drag on the ship. The propellers on this ship are huge. They can push a 90,000-ton ship at highway speeds. Conversely, when they stop spinning, they're a tremendous drag. So now with number 2 propeller dragging, it drags the rear end of the ship to the right. The ship's still moving forward with huge momentum, but now in an unexpected direction. And we get pulled up onto a sandbar and get stuck. We, down in the propulsion plants, do all our casualty actions. Everything's good, no problems, except we're not moving anymore. Everyone else on the ship notices that we've stopped moving, and we're all leaning due to the ship being tilted to the left. Our families on the pier are watching and wondering, WTF? Larry instantly has to deal with the casualty, which all of us watchstanders are doing. Everything good. The uh-oh squad comes down, takes all our logs, gives us blank ones to continue with, notes everyone on watch, and hangs out to bother us. Lunchtime comes, we all have lunch, leaning to the left, watching ourselves on TV courtesy of the news hellos. 6 hours later, at high tide, we float off the sandbar and make our way to the pier. Heroes, with our tails between our legs. The inquiry tried to pin it all on Mark. His lawyer produced the depositions from all the control room crew that all said the same thing. Larry said that he gave the orders not to start the pump until he gave the order. It all bounced back onto Larry. He got a formal reprimand on his record, which essentially ended his naval career. Mark was a celebrity among us for a while. The ship was fine, no damage. The captain did make admiral, though he waited a couple more months for that to happen. And that, kids, is how the Enterprise ran aground in San Francisco Bay in 1983. Most embarrassing. What I love is that Mark still started the pump without orders because of the protocol for the high temperature alarm. And our last story. EM is mad because neighbor put thorned bushes in yard. Cast is pretty simple. Me is me with N for neighbor. Little bit of backstory. This happened around May, and I live next to a married couple where the wife has a garden, which from what I've heard she's had for years. You might think it's just a few pretty blossoms and bushes, but nope. Her entire front left side of her yard and front yard, those patches of dirt you see next to the stairs leading to the door, was covered in various plants, flowers, and shrubs of all different sizes, shapes, colors, etc. Enter our entitled kids, both male, with the oldest being 11 and the youngest 9. These two live across the street on the right from us and had a nasty habit of crossing the street to pick neighbors' flowers with amazing skill, making bouquets for various reasons like special occasions, events, and sometimes just to make mama happy. The worst part is that entitled mom would tell them to do it. Neighbor has repeatedly told the two to stop to the point where she went over to talk to their mother about it. From what I've heard, it didn't go well. Apparently, EM didn't want to buy bouquets at the store because they were too expensive, and the drive's just a waste of gas. Plus, it's not fair. You have all those flowers and you won't share? How greedy. She would call the cops, but she knew they'd just give her a warning or take EM's side since around here the cops are pretty easy to lie to. Instead, she decided to take matters into her own hands. A week later, when I left with my brother for vacation from the house, I found thorny bushes scattered around her gardens, mostly in areas that made it extremely difficult to get through without getting pricked or cut a few hundred times. I found out she planted firethorns, blackthorn, and my favorite creeping juniper bushes. When I asked, she said simply, "I wish them good luck." Not even a week later, I hear banging on the neighbor's door. Looking out the window, I see the EM fuming in rage while her kids were next to her, equally upset. Some even had bandages on their arm, leg, or face. She looked less of a Karen and more of a semi-fat soccer mom with quite a bit of cash to her name. Haircut wasn't the "bring me your manager," but instead the "my son owns insert random unrelated company" that isn't even that serious. Neighbor: "May I EM cuts her off. "How dare you hurt my children?" N: "Explain to me how I hurt your children. I did nothing wrong." EM: "Nothing wrong? Nothing wrong?" Presenting her kids to her, full of bandages, very upset, and possibly on the verge of crying. N: "Let me guess. Hurt while playing?" EM: "No, your death garden did this. My kids are scared of your yard because those plants were hurting them. Do you know how much money it costs to buy them new clothes because their stuff's getting ripped and torn from the thorns?" N: "Well, why were they in my garden in the first place? If they stayed away and stopped picking at my yard, this wouldn't have happened. And you wouldn't be yelling like you have no brain. I planted them because I thought they were beautiful. Not only that, but burglary exists everywhere, so it's perfect protection." After a little bit of back and forth, the EM leaves, but not without the threat of suing her and demanding the thorny bushes be taken away. Luckily, the kids stopped picking at her yard while EM gave death glares N's way whenever the opportunity shows. Your neighbor is a druid, solving problems the druid way. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.